Hi there, I thought I'd make another video about this game on the, I guess, operation on Tannenberg. Maybe we could call it a campaign. It's from the Der Weltkrieg series, and it's a series I've been looking at for a long time. The games themselves, when they started, they were sort of smaller modules, and they've been combined into sort of five, I think. So there's four sort of main games, and then a whole war combining packs. So they're quite costly like that. But I've been interested in it for a long time. I was really happy. We were on holiday in Berlin 2 weeks ago, and I bought this game for €20, €22, and they call it the introductory game to the whole series. So, and it really is. They also sort of intend it as an introductory game to wargaming as well, which is a commendable thing. So it comes in a Ziploc, and you have two card cover sheets. On the back, it explains. So it says something about why wargaming, and it invites you to the video. So there are comprehensive videos on how to play this game. It's not a complicated system, but by any means, but it is a bit different from some war games, and it really helps to be shown step by step if you're a beginner to this kind of thing. So you see here the map. It's not a huge map. It could join up with others in the series. You get the counter sheet, which is half a page size of counters. Most of them you can see on the map. There's a few extra counters for potential German reinforcements, and then some strength point markers there. Here we have a supply and demoralization points track, and a reminder of supply costs. Here is the combat results table. The combat results table is points based, so it's not odds based. So if you have 8 strength points in a combat, you roll 1d6 on this column, and you may get modifiers +4, ±4 at the moment, but only going up to there or there. So you can see you go from 1 strength where you, without modifiers, you're not going to cause any strength point losses, all the way up to you have 50 strength. Maximum you're ever going to cause is 10, maybe 12 with modifiers. You can have more than 50 strength points attacking, in which case, you would say if you had 60, you would look at that column and then add it to this column as well. Now, the reason you can get such vast amount of strength points attacking is the particular nature of the combat here. Essentially, the defender is tripled on the defense, so whatever their strength points is, it's tripled, unless they decide to retreat and take 2/3 of the losses they were going to take, in which case they are doubled. So you can see if you are, say, 10 strength points units, the attacker will roll here and potentially get let's say 3 at the most hits, and the defender will be rolling on the 30 column, and they will get between 3 and 6, maybe up to 8 hits. So you can see it's very costly to be an attacker in this game, and simulating World War I, it probably works quite well in the sense that on the attack you're going to have a lot of reserves to feed in to have some success in that. Interesting thing is that the supply is more costly on defense. So 1 supply point will supply 4 attacking infantry strengths, or 2 let's say for now defending infantry strengths. So in that previous example of 10 strength points each side, the attacker would spend 3. You have to sort of round up, and the defender would spend 5 supply points. Otherwise, they're going to have to be at half. So you can see if you have more supply than your opponent, you can keep attacking, run down their supply. Eventually, they're going to have to say, I can't supply that defense. So that 10 strength points would go down to 5 and then be tripled up to 15. So you could still get do more damage to the attacker, but if he's got more strength points to supply in and more supply points to put in, eventually he's going to whittle you down and overcome you. So that is the kind of, in a nutshell, how the combat works. So just show a little bit with the components. So here's the rule book you get in this introductory game. It's very nicely written. It's in those sort of cases 188182. I did have a few queries. There was a little bit of errata that came in a sheet with it, so I just put it into the game. There were a few queries I had, some things that could have been a little sort of clearer because things are done differently, like essentially in combat. Let's speak about the combat then quickly, because it brings us to another big feature of this game system. So you can see it works on hexagons, so movement is by hexagons, but the terrain types, you have a nice terrain key here, but the details of it are listed on the back of the rule book. Terrain the cost is per hex side rather than hex, so if this fellow's moving into this hex, that's on a clear terrain hex size, because the triangle denotes that the hex side you're moving to. So if you're in here, you're crossing a broken ground hex side, but if you're here, you are crossing a clear terrain hex side. So for instance, into this hex, it would cost 1 movement point from this direction, but from this direction you're moving through woods, and that's going to cost you 2 movement points. Swamp there costs 3, and the rivers add an extra 1, so that would be 2 movement points. From here that would be 4 movement points. From here that would still be 2, and then major rivers, these ones add an extra 3, so that would be 4 movement points. Now if, say, you're crossing from here, that's 3 plus 2 is 5 movement points. That's fine for this cavalry, but this fellow's only got 4. You can always take that 1 hex move. Another feature though is, and let me grab a unit from here, is that if you're moving into an enemy zone of control, it costs 1 extra movement point. So the enemy zone of control here means that that would cost him 2 movement points to there. Now he could continue moving, jumping over the river like this, but it's going to cost him 1 to move out and another 1 to move in. So normally without that fellow there, that would cost 2 movement points. With this fellow here, that's going to cost 2 to go over, 1 for that, and 1 for that is 4 movement points to move into there. So that would be a 1, 2, 6 movement point move. And so that's very important, and major rivers you can't go, so if I'm here, you cannot go from enemy zone of control to enemy zone of control over a major river. I would have to do it round that way. So you can see you do have handy barriers caused by the terrain. Now, so with the combat, the way it works is that if this fellow's in this hex and he wants to attack across this hex side, well, you'd say, okay, so he's defending clear terrain. Well, no, he can choose to use that or that, so the hex side crossed or sort of attacked across, or either adjacent. So in this case, this fellow can say, okay, we're claiming the woods terrain. So on the woods chart, on the terrain chart, woods is -2 on the die roll. That's a 1d6 die roll, so that's a big change for the attacker. Now in combat, the attacker finds their strength and they roll their damage. Then the defender can decide whether they're going to retreat or not. And if they do retreat, they will take 1/3 less of the losses. If they in either case, they get to counterattack, and so they will then roll their die according to their strength. And if it was on woods, they would get +1 on their die roll. and it and they're on counterattack they are tripled. As mentioned previously, if they retreated, they would be doubled. So you see, that's basically how it works. There's also, you can do what's called a column attack, which is essentially attack while you're moving. It only happens at the end of the unit's movement, but obviously what it does mean is, you can push away an enemy unit, perhaps he retreats or you eliminate him, and you move into advance after combat, and then another of your fellows could maybe move over through the gap you created. So that's how the sort of game goes in a nutshell. So the rules themselves are so you've got 26 cases on 12 pages, and then you go to, they call it the Tannenberg scenario. There's only one scenario, this is it for this introductory game. Each turn is equivalent to 4 days, and each hex is a mile. And so you're beginning in August, and then it goes into the beginning of September. So the game's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 games long. And in each turn you have a number of phases. You start with the Germans. Reinforcements arrive in the hex. For the Germans in this game, they are all going to arrive in Bromberg down there. For the Russians, they either arrive in Warsaw here, or up in Grodno here, or Kovno there. And you can see I've piled up, what's the stack fell over, the reinforcements already. So the Germans don't get many, the Russians get lots. So the German, with a qualification, the Germans have potential of reinforcements from over there. I'll get into that in a minute. So then the scenario lists a bit. So these are the standard rules, and then the scenario. So you have like demoralization points listed here, and the scenario adds some special demoralization points. So it's a bit annoying because you don't have those gathered together in one place. But for the terms of this game, it's all one thing. But I guess they're saying these are the standard rules fit for any game of the series, and these are particular ones just for this scenario. There's some merit in that. So those were special scenario rules. Here's the setup. Setup's very easy, and then there's just some designer's notes and so forth on the back page. One thing is setup is by hex. They could have done it by names, because once you know that hex is Warsaw, then you could just stick it straight on Warsaw. But I remember names better than I remember numbers. Maybe that's just me. So there's a few strange things as well. For a sort of beginner wargaming, just to sort of point out, there are some things that could be a bit disconcerting. So, for example, it talks about railhead markers. They don't come in the game. And the rules for that are not, but rules for entraining are, and entrain markers are mentioned. So that should be an entrain marker, but anyway, there aren't any in the game. So, and another thing is that it says on the units they have their setup hex location marks. They don't. It would make setup even quicker if they did, but it's not that onerous, to be honest. About 10 minutes. I'd like to speak about the map a bit more, and sort of this particular scenario. So the map has, apart from marsh and rivers, broken, clear terrain, you have these counters are fortresses, so that they don't move, they have no zone of control, but they aid in supply for your side, but it doesn't say they break supply for the opponent's side. So they're just static defences. They're sort of helpful if you want to add a defender to them, but an attacker could just move straight past them. But compared to that, you have other hexes which have, and it's only for this game in the series, what are called unassailable fortresses. So that grey boundary indicates that this hex essentially is unenterable and it will never be captured by the opponent. So the German has a few of them, one of them quite particularly being Königsberg up here. And the Russians have some as well, Warsaw and Grodno and Kovno, their reinforcement centres being those, and that's is essential. Notably, the German reinforcement centre is not an unassailable fortress, so potentially that could get captured. But there are other features on the map apart from those that are very important. Now, one of them is the fact that cities will gain the Russian player 30 demoralization points. Now, when you consider that demoralization points, I think in the main full series game, it might, once your nation has taken a certain amount of demoralization, perhaps it collapses or something. In this game, they just suffice for victory points. They don't have any other effect. But when you consider that, say for the Russians, 4 strength infantry unit is their sort of standard. They have some 5s. The Germans have some 8s and potentially 1 9, but that's the strongest you get. So you knock out one of those units, that's 8 demoralization points. The Russians get 30 for taking a city. The Germans could get 15 for taking a city from the Russians. So normally it's 15 both sides. Just for this game itself, it's 30 for the Russians. So they're doubled. So you can see that's big. You're going to defend those cities with a lot of might. They are worth, 6 of your best units. 3 of your best units if you're Russian, and 4 or 5 if you're German. So, but they're not. That they're just, their name is written and they're a small thing in the map. So I drew around them. Otherwise, you can't see where they are. I had counters marking them in my previous game, but it's just, it sort of clutters up the map. So they are exceedingly important, and essentially because some cities like Königsberg are in an unassailable fortress, they will never be taken. So essentially what it means is that that city and this city where the German 8th Army headquarters starts, which is called Allenstein, are major victory objectives for the Russians. And for the Germans, on the other hand, it turns out that that's the only city they can possibly take. Warsaw, Grodno and Kovno are in unassailable fortresses. So those are major features which we need to know. Then the other thing is to do with what they call the Russian Steamroller. Well, as we remember from the World War I history, the Russians mobilized and started their mobilization and then actually started their campaign before they were fully mobilized in an effort to assist the French. So the idea being that, knowing that the Germans would bring into bear their Schleifenplan plan on the Western Front, the thought was that if the Russians threaten Germany from the east, they would have to withdraw units from that front, and therefore weaken their advantage over there in reinforcing over here. So the Russians mobilized early. It was a bit of a risky thing. They weren't fully prepared, and perhaps that is indicated by the fact that their units are not that strong, but mainly by the fact that a lot of their units are off the board. They come on as reinforcements later, whereas essentially the German 8th Army is already there. The Russians have a 1st Army here, 2nd Army here, and then they have a 3rd Army headquarters that can come on towards the end of the game, just to give them some extra benefit, essentially in supplying, because something I didn't mention is that you need like a line of communication free of enemy zones of control from a unit to its headquarters to supply them. But also, the longer that line of communication is, over 4 movement points worth, the less strength you are able to bear. So you still have to pay the supply points, but you don't get to bear the full strength. So for example, if there's a battle going on here, this is supplying this, so the attacker would need 2 supply points for that 8-point unit, strength point unit, but it's 1, 2 because of the woods there, 3, 4 movement points, so that's fine. If on the other hand he was attacking here, that's 5 movement points away from the headquarters, and he's going to lose 1 strength point for every movement points further away. On the other hand, and this is the interesting thing, that for the defender, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, because we're having to go over the rivers, except there's going to be some modifiers because the rail lines that are marked here will subtract some of that movement penalty. The defender's a long way. Let's say he's 8 movement points away from his headquarters. Well, if he was an attacker, that would be -4 strength, so you could see that would be useless. But as the defender, you only have a minus beyond every 8 movement points. So although it's more expensive to supply, you can be further away from your source of supply without a detriment as the defender or the counter-attacking unit. So that's an interesting kind of balancing point, in that the attacker spends less supply, but their headquarters has to be closer to them to be effective. The defender, you can kind of see the implications of it. It means that an attacker could attack far away from a defending headquarters and not get the same, but have to have his headquarters hackers closer. So the attacking headquarters will have to be quite close, and your defending headquarters could be further away. So you can defend over a broader stretch than you can attack, is essentially what it, with effectiveness, is essentially what it says. So where was I? I've been putting counters willy-nilly. So the steamroller. So because of the Russian attempts to steamroll the German 8th Army, in this game they get demoralization points for moving into Germany, and the border of Germany is marked by this line here. So for every unit they get a certain amount of demoralization points, not many, but critically on at the end of the 3rd turn, you check for German reinforcements, and so what that means is that for the closer and the more infantry units, so cavalry that can sort of swoop around a lot don't count, but the more and the closer you have infantry units to Königsberg as the Russian, the more threatened the Germans feel, and so the bigger their amount of reinforcements are, but consequently the more victory points you will gain as the Russian. Now the balance, I'm not quite sure of the balance of that, but it's essentially what you have to do is you have to count out 8 movement points worth from Königsberg, and 9 movement points and 10 movement points worth for the calculation of how the steamroller works. So what you see, you get 5 points for every infantry division less than 8 movement points away from Königsberg, 3 that is more than 8, that is 8, 2 for 9 and 1 for 10. And it's not marked on the map, so it's they give you some hexes that are, they give you 3 hexes that are 8 movement points away, and I marked them with markers, but again it's cluttery and cumbersome and markers in the way, so I used my pen. This is the 8 movement points. You can't go over, you can't move through the lakes there, and then the yellow line indicates the 10 movement points. So that is a potential objective for the Russian. Now it's interesting that I've read online some people have said, oh, this is a bit too scripted. This campaign itself is better in that when you fit it into sort of a larger campaign, because you don't need to use this scenario, you set the goals yourself. Well, I don't agree with that, because the Russian doesn't have to get into there. In fact, if they do get into there, the German just gets more reinforcements. The Russian won't get that many as many demoralization points, or otherwise known as victory points, but you only get half a DM point for each strength point of reinforcements forced to be taken by the German player. So on a sliding scale, so if you only get 20 points out of that calculation, depending on your closeness on the third turn only, then there's no German reinforcements. Otherwise they might just get 1 cavalry, 3, 8, 5 infantry, 2, 6 cavalry, all the way up to potentially 9, 1 infantry, 5, 8, 5 and 6, 2, 6 cavalry. That's all of those extra ones there, and those are some breakdown ones for the fortresses. So that would be potentially 16, about 24 demoralization points. So you can see it's actually worth more to take that city or that city than to obtain the best result there, and the best result will be very difficult against a in any way competent German player. It could only really be a mistake. Because of the zones of control, you can move past them, and because of the attritional nature of the combat, you don't just fight a unit and it either stays or it's eliminated. They stay and get attrited. So you can see in at the end of 3 turns, the German just really has to put some strong... Yes, these might get completely eliminated. They have 2 8-5s there, 2 8-5s there, and 2 8-5s here. So they only have to place them in particular locations. They will get attrited, which will earn demoralization points for the Russian, but you won't burst through them without a big mistake from the Germans. So that option is there for the Russian, and I played it, you know, I went hell for leather as a Russian in my previous game just to try it, because that was kind of historically where they were going for. They wanted to, you know, penetrate nicely, take Königsberg, a major port, even get to Danzig would have been great, but Königsberg, I think within the scope of those 3 turns, what's that, 12 days, is just the only realistic one. So that is there, and that is all to go for. So that's all really to say about the game. What I'm going to do now, I'm going to I'll stop this video and then I'll do a short one showing you just how a game turn plays out, to show you how quick and smoothly it plays. Speaking of quick and smooth, although these are beautiful counters and it's you know, well produced, they are really slippery, and you do get piles, you do get stacks of counters, and they do tend to slip about in a fair bit. So these are essential, because otherwise it's going to fly around with your fingers. The last thing I'd like to say, and I think I'm going to keep saying this for almost, well, for every game really that I cover, until people, the producers sort of set up and take notice, especially in this day and age where so many games, I mean, there's 2 things here which fight against each other. One is that the fact that a game only lasts about 5 to 8 weeks apparently these days. It sells everything that it's going to sell within that time, and after that, that's it, it's end over, and so a company has to move, it's game over for the game, and the company has to move on to a next game, because we have this, it was so much product coming in, nothing can last for very long. A series can, something like ASL Gold and Oldie can, but those are very few. So series can sort of keep people tied to a series, but they still have to keep producing new product for it. What this means is that games come out and there's not enough time to properly develop them. You know, there can be tons of errata and stuff like that. They have to look good, so people will snap them up on first impression, and there's going to be, you're going to lack some quality control of the actual details and things like that. But the other thing that's mitigating against is the fact that we're to blame as the at the end of the day. You could say at least we're on the other end of this process, is that we buy so many games, we play so many games that we move from one game to the next very quickly. That means it's difficult to we have to read we're reading new rule books over and over. So when all you have is the terrain effects chart and the combat chart and the others, just necessary things to record, there's so much more in the rule book that you need to know. You need to know the particular stacking for this game, how zones of control work, what training is, because it's not here. How does it move when you train? What's the rail cap? Yes, it is actually written helpfully on here. How does entering and exiting enemy zones of control, how does that work in this game? Because the last two games that you played, it was very different, and your brain still remembers that, and it can get confused with this. Is there a minimum 1 hex move? What's column move? What's column attack? How does a supply line work? How do you supply? What happens when you're unsupplied? How does retreat work in this game? What are the special details for that? What's the priority of eliminating units in a stack? Oh, it's the attacking cavalry first infantry. These are all particular rules that are particular to this game. What's the earning of demoralization points? You've got the track, but how do you deal them? Do I have to keep flicking through the rulebook to check all of these details? No, I shouldn't. These are essential for playing this game. And look, you can see I've fitted them all. That is every single rule in that rule book summarized. It could have been done. Why wasn't that white space used? I'm not picking out SPW at all. This is every single producer. And part of it is because they like just things to look good and uncluttered. And I'm saying yes, but that presentation should not trump efficiency in playing a game. We need this because we keep buying so many new products, but you can see how that works against. To do that takes time and a bit of effort, and especially to make it present very well. And if you're having to bang games out every 6 to 8 weeks, that time's not there. So those two things I can see fight against each other. But here there was a wasted opportunity. We've got 2 cardboard sheets that do nothing than form as covers. Why were these not player aids? Okay, so that's my mini rant, but I think this is a great game. I love it. I wish the counters weren't so slippery. And now over to the example of play.